Good morning and welcome to our webinar, Practical AI Notes from the Field, presented by MC+A and Swirl. Our panel today consists of Michael Cizmar, Managing Director of MC+A, Sid Probstein, CEO of Swirl, and we have a guest speaker, Judith Phillips, CEO of Squark. The agenda will start off with our guest speaker, Judith, giving us his take on the why for Gen AI, and then we'll proceed into field notes on enterprise AI, specifically why Gen AI, what are the barriers to Gen AI, and most importantly, how do you measure success? And at the end, we'll have time for questions. So Judah, take it away on the why of Gen AI.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to talk about generative AI in business today. And I was asked by these esteemed gentlemen and experts to talk about the why and tried to do something that kind of crosses a broad section of themes, knowing perhaps why most of you are listening today. So let me just get into it. Last time I did a presentation, I had like two dots on me, and somebody said, "No, I know more about me. Why should we listen to you?" So I've been doing software and internet and AI and machine learning stuff since I was a boy. I've been at a bunch of startups in some large established companies, started my own companies that have been successful. Squark was actually sold in May to a company named Innovair. We'll announce that within the next couple of weeks. And I've also been doing some investing and advising and connecting people in the AI industry in Boston. And today I'm really excited to be with you. I've worked with Sid on the same team and directly for decades now. And it's always thrilling to see what he's been up to and what he's doing with Swirl. He's one of the best Python programmers on earth, just so y'all know that. So Squark I had started with my partner Dan. Golly, it was probably about 5 years ago now. And we were focused on automated machine learning and AI for predictive analytics to be able to forecast outcomes that can help people make better decisions faster. And we eventually figured it out, lightly funded, mostly bootstrapped. And then we had that exit to Innovair, which is a global leader in nonprofit fundraising. It's an 80-plus-year-old private company that raises funds for the biggest nonprofits in the world, from the VFW in the United States to UNICEF and more. So it's really exciting to be working with Innovair these days. I'm the Chief AI and Product Officer. And so generative AI in business, what does that mean? It means a lot of different things to people, but it's this rapidly evolving field, which is largely focused on generating like words, images, sometimes sounds and numbers. And people are using it to really like level up or unlock a lot of efficiency specific to what they're doing. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how to think about unlocking that and the why. So we know, I think at this point, what is generative AI, right? But there's systems, foundational models, open source algorithms, and libraries, even websites that learn from existing data, maybe to predict the next word, and like fancy autocompletes, or look at images three-dimensionally and be able to diffuse and generate images to create new content. I first got exposed to Gen AI in probably like 2016 or so, 2015, through the work of like this guy, Ian Goodfellow, who invented GANs. And I remember I tried to do a Gen AI startup right around the time it got to be very painful doing Squark. And we generated some Pokemon characters that look like blurs in 2019 with GANs. Stable diffusion came out a bit later, and that's a huge growing field, and all the multimodal stuff as well. But the underlying techniques, right, are largely from the data science world. And we'll talk a little bit about how that came to be. At Squark, we've been using transformers for quite some time to pull out the words and meanings to create new features, new predictors, and regressions and classifications when strings exceed 100 characters. So BERT was one of the first approaches we used to that. And that was kind of the second incarnation of my exposure to sort of the Gen AI. And then obviously GPT started to come out. Depending on when you got introduced to it, you were probably impressed. It was always impressive, but in 2022 or so, it started to gain some popularity. And we saw, obviously, a little bit before that, some really cool visual models come out. And since 2022, late 2020, early 2023, generative AI has obviously become a dominant paradigm, moving from interfaces from point and click to do and describe, and obviously creating a lot of efficiencies around summarizing and creating content or other applications like you might see at companies like Swirl. Then obviously there's a whole bunch of multimodal stuff going on, whether the new sort of computer use stuff that I think came out yesterday with Claude Sonnet, or the O1, if you've been playing around with that and its reasoning capabilities. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on. So that's part of the why, right? There's a sea change. And if you ignore sea changes in technology design patterns or principles or sort of the movements of markets towards certain things, well, you may not be as successful. So I know that, knowing Sid, there's a lot going on. And I actually started in information retrieval back in 97 with this company called Sovereign Hill Software that created from an ANSI C++ toolkit natural language search capability. It was used in the 90s to search the congressional record. It was called Inquiry. So thomas.loc.gov. And since then, search has come a long way. And as we see with architectures like RAG, the ability to interrogate data sources with language is becoming, the dream is not fully been realized, but is beginning to be realized, and continues to be very dreamy and on the bleeding edge with companies like Swirl. So these generative AI experiences can make recommendations, analyze search results, summarize documents, integrate with other systems, help to create, whether it's SQL queries or other natural language approaches. There's a lot of applicability to generative AI in search and information retrieval. So that's another why. All these things are going on. I'm sure you've heard of many of them if you're extremely online like me. But the product design and visualization is getting pretty impressive. The ability to code, quickly generate content. We're starting to see agents for intelligent process automation, and companies are reporting significant ROIs depending on where they're at and how they're deploying. There's obviously a lot of challenges with doing this stuff. It's always been about the data, right? The quality of the data and what's going into the models, how you're generating that data or closing data gaps, and a lot about issues around regulation or making humans feel comfortable with these approaches and models. And then when they come off your local host, how do you really scale them up and make them performant in a way that creates value and hopefully some net profit sooner than later? It's part of the why is getting started with this stuff. So to do that, I would suggest assessing your business needs. And the next few slides, I'll talk about when companies are successful and give some examples, but it always starts with a business need, maybe a technology-informed business need, but it's like, what are those use cases? So you need to establish those or identify those and then start working on them. It's pretty low cost to get started with this stuff. I'm sure you're getting approval from your team, your boss, or the legal department, and then work on your different strategies. And what I mean by that is think about scalability, governance, integration with existing systems. And then, of course, you'll need to start building internal capabilities. It's the hard part, but there's a lot of resources out there to either upskill your existing workers or go out and find talent either locally or globally. And then obviously this is like any learning experience, you want to iterate and continuously improve and optimize. So like, I think that's a lot about the why you've got to do it and sort of a bit how. And I've been doing this long enough relative in like a commercial context, like selling deals and getting no's, of course, a lot of them, and a lot of yeses. But when I was talking to Sid, Michael, and team, so give me some anecdotes. Why are companies successful? And so the first thing is all the companies that I've ever worked with who are successful are very quickly able to get to a clear use case. With predictive analytics, it's about which two, which three, right? Classification or regression, predicting a number, or time series, predicting a number over time. With generative AI, generating something that's going to save some labor, create some efficiency, right? So what is that use case in your business? Is it BDR copy? Is it responding to customers? Is it customer service. There's a lot of evidence, like use cases out there that point to where the ROIs are. So that's one way to map to that use case. And then when you have that use case, people can be aspirational. Like you have to be in reality, and the reality is really based on your data. So you have to have the ability to get to your data. It has to be sufficient for what you're trying to answer. You have to have an ability to close any gaps that you find. With Squark, I would always joke like, well, we can work with two columns in a target, so 3 columns. So you can start small. People like to start with the kitchen sink, but you can start small. The teams that have adopted predictive or Gen AI over the years that I've worked with are willing to learn new things, and that's cultural. Their systems aren't places where I like to joke data goes to die, right? Data is pushed to other systems. It's used for some decisioning or some other downstream automation. So they've got a way to activate. I think with agent frameworks, that'll become more common. They're tool users, right? Who may not necessarily want to build everything. Again, that's cultural. Buyers have been VP level or above, sometimes directors in large companies. They have like a budget. Like I spent a lot of time hoping people would buy. And then when I get on the phone, I sort of say, hey, in a nice way, how long you've been looking, and then do you have a budget? Or who you've been looking at. You'll find pretty quickly whether they're buyers or not. So those who are looking have a perspective on this stuff and you have budget. So that's a way to get through any barriers to getting time with some of these very busy companies. Sentiment enterprises that have bought this stuff. I know that Gen AI is raging in SMB, and there's probably some huge markets to be enabled there. But I've seen a lot of usage in enterprise. And then there's always like senior buyers involved in when companies are successful with this. Maybe fostered or investigated or instigated by like middle management or people hands-on doing the use cases. But for the most successful companies, there's always been some senior buyer who's had to get involved. And so if you kind of have all these things, you can be successful, whether you're vending or trying to deploy them in your organization. Now, companies, on the other hand, like when they are unsuccessful, they do not have leadership buy-in, right? It's either aspirational or like it's somebody who wants to do something and they have the greatest of intentions, but they don't have a leader who's going to carry it through. And largely that's because they lack a use case that's very tied to value. It may be a cool use case for the team or the person, but from an enterprise perspective or a business perspective, it's not focused like on the value that anybody cares about right now. And there's often issues with data, or they want to do something and then the data science team comes in, or another data science team comes in, and it becomes somewhat political, or there's a build, we can only build it, right? No one can do it as good as us. And I sort of say, well, if that's true, then double down. If we can do it, we just saved you a ton of time. If we can't, then only you can do it. So either way, it's a good decision to take the risk. So that works when you have the other side of the equation, right? Companies that are willing to invest and sort of take a shot at creating huge economies in value. And then with this stuff, people worry about their jobs being replaced, right? I mean, that's a common theme. It's been forever a theme in any automation with computers. People are going to lose their jobs. So like the less seasoned employees, right, are less, you would think they'd be more likely to adopt this, but some of these tools are like secret weapons that they use, whether it's like Replit or Cursor, right, to enable things. And they get a little bit paranoid that they're going to be replaced by an automated AI technology that builds models in an hour or a couple or minutes that would otherwise take like 4 weeks of their time. So then you've also got like unsuccessful is like not enterprise focused. They're either team, which is okay, or individually focused. And then they can't sign deals, right? Like if you can't get the software that you need, then you'll never be successful. So that goes to the first point, which is failing to get leadership buy-in. So the key differences, right, are that companies can get it done, activate on the data. They have senior buy-in. They have the need through a use case to use tools to deliver on that value. Oh yeah, so this is just if, I think it's getting recorded. I would encourage you, like part of the why of doing this is the use case, the data access and closing gaps, assessing the different tools that are available. There's a lot of tools. It's somewhat of a state of perfect competition, right? In the AI tool world, though it's rapidly becoming, I think, a bit of a monopolistic competition. There are some key models and companies that are rising to the top. So you need to evaluate them against your needs based on what your stakeholders, right, and the decision makers in your company want. It's how you get the leadership buy-in, how you get the signature and the budget if you don't have it. The whole build versus buy thing, right? There are a lot of ways to own your own intelligence, and it doesn't always mean saying, hey, Sid coded in Notepad, which he could do, but there's a balance to that as well. And so unsuccessful, just on the other side, right? Lack of defined use cases, lack of leadership, reliance on hand-coded Rube Goldberg machines, and hard to get the data and the ability to leverage it. So again, clear use cases, you got to get your data access, you've got to get your appropriate tools, engage in the enterprise. So you've got to get the people and the leaders supporting you. And when you understand these hallmarks that I've talked about, and you sort of put this formula and weight it against the experience you're having at your company, you'll sort of know where to factor up, factor down, and you'll be successful. So that's the story. I'm going to stop sharing now. I hope that was helpful around the why and some other methods that I wanted to share with you all today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
All right.
Let me share back to.
That was terrific, Judah. Thank you. And I have to say, much as I sometimes am nostalgic for the days of writing in Notepad, that's one thing AI really changed, right? Is the way that code is written now. I never write without GitHub Copilot ever in Xcode pretty much, or Visual Studio Code. And that did change, right? So, and the use case is very clear. Make one developer a bit more productive. It certainly does that. So, but I think when we talk about the enterprise, right, there's a lot of depth, and you gave us a bunch of really good starting points to talk about field notes from practical and real AI implementations. So thank you for that.
I think a big key there is that I don't think anything there is different than any other evolution of technology, and that people who are not taking that into consideration are more challenged than others, which we'll kind of talk about as we go through our field notes.
Let's go ahead and dive in. So I loved where you started, Judah, with understanding the why and having a use case. But I think, can we drill down a bit on how do we define why more precisely so that we can set ourselves up for success? And with all due respect to Steve Jobs, I think we can say a lot of no's, but what would we start with in terms of how do you guys get started with this stuff? I'd love to hear your story.
I think the quote here for Steve Jobs is really, it's not about necessarily saying no, but keeping a very focused use case or function, almost atomic in nature, and then building it up from there. The more that the AI is going to do for you, the harder it is. We find that our clients provide the most, and the business provides the most vision without even thinking about it. They'll complain about a particular process or workflow that is fairly challenging, and if we can stick on a department, I think of, as you and I've spoken, Sid, selling into an enterprise is really challenging versus selling into a department. And so the AI is no different. The department has a specific need. It has a specific nomenclature, workflows, and the more granular you are focusing on the use case, the more likely you're going to be successful. Like your co-pilot, like I need a specific answer to this, or we have a client who's working on prior authorization. So specifically the form that comes in, making a determination if it passes the muster to be approved or needs human review. And they're eliminating 90% of the human process in that. There's still, and that's because they have a mandate that says that they have to respond within 24 hours. That's a specific use case. that's a specific why. And if you start with a charter similar to that, you're more likely to be successful. How about your experience, Sid?
I think that the focus is about drawing a box, especially in the enterprise. Oh, you're talking about maybe a 100-year-old company, for example, or even a big one that's 50 years old. There's a huge amount of detail involved. So to propose AI broadly, it is an almost impossible thing, right? You'd almost imagine wanting to become, or you could picture, right, a board looking at that and saying, well, how much is that going to cost? Do we have to sort of become a Google or something like that? That's not necessarily our strong point. So when you draw a box and say you have to target specific things, a group, a community that has a high value, consistent, and repeatable problem that can be solved by automation, right? It's not trying to eliminate, well, maybe it is trying to eliminate a wait from a partner, but it's probably something internally that causes delays, makes it hard to get the right answer, is very frustrating to employees. So if you can identify, or customers for that matter, if you can identify those kinds of things and then break that down to the next level of specificity, right? What roles exactly in which departments, what systems, applications, or data are they using to make that? Are there workflows available? Is it a manual process that's the problem? And then maybe most importantly, where I take issue with Steve Jobs, the trick is to figure out what you want to measure that you're getting a yes from, right? It's not about what you don't do, but if you say we're going to try to do something like identify a solution for a specific group, we have to be able to know where they are today and quantify it, and then prove that we got value from it. Nobody wants to spend money, especially right now, if they can't verify that there's a return on that investment. And I think, Judith, this was very much your point earlier, right? About if you can't get the buy-in across the organization, but especially from budget holders, it's not going to happen. And for it to happen, you need to be able to show that there's a real likelihood of benefit.
And if I may, like what Judah, I was going to tee you up, the process that Judah outlined from a sales perspective, it's kind of funny that this sales folks, mature sales organizations will look for those things because those are the marks of successful central outcomes. And maybe you could expand a little on that.
Yeah,
with respect.
I totally will. So like when I say enterprise, I mean like companies that do like $1 billion in revenue or more, 500 million, super corporate. I mean, I don't necessarily mean like don't sell departmentally. It's a lot harder, I agree, to like sell 35,000 licenses. But you can sell into companies that have people who have budgets that have a need. And from like a just entrepreneurial perspective, the idea of like a buyer persona and an ideal customer profile, it might be VP level and above in a $500 million company who has like the title marketing, right, in their title, the word marketing or growth, right, or acquisition or whatever it is that you're selling. And then they have pain, and there's common pain themes that are out on the web, or you might read about in the internet, or you might see like LinkedIn or in case studies, or you might find them out through looking, if they're public, at like their 10Ks, 10Qs, those things like that. And so you can find like what the business driver is of the need for like one of these use cases. When you think of Gen AI, it's like words, images, numbers, sounds, right? It's kind of data, maybe analysis in the future. So
every day there's a new exciting feature.
Yeah.
And now it can generate images. Now it can read them.
Yeah.
So again, right, in that environment, to get a successful why is tricky. You have to kind of stay with one, right, and keep focused on, well,
you have to ask people, you have to like do discovery. Like it's a lot of these companies are saying, hey, this is how you do it. This is what you do. The ones that are becoming more successful give you more of like a, no pun intended, but like a canvas to where you can, or a really focused experience. And I'm trying not to name actual vendors that does a particular thing, right? So it's been to ask people like, what are their goals? What are they trying to do this year? And one of the things that we got really, I think, good at, and it's still a benefit today, is like distilling down what the tool that we sold, or what the tools in Gen AI do, and then listening to people about what their goals are and being able to like pull out like where it could fit in. So for example, at Squark, there's binary classification, right? Machine learning, which predicts which two classes like probability of 0 or 1, Sid or Judah, yes or no, sun or moon, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, whatever it is. And so if you have to predict two things that occur in your business, what do you need to predict? Well, maybe you sell things. So you want to predict, like, will they buy, conversion, right? People like that. There's a lot of competition there, or churn, upsell, right?
Those are high value problems.
Yeah.
Right?
So like when you go in there and then you're talking to that, I think what I was saying, CMO or a marketer at a VP level or above in a $500 million organization that has customers, and your value is like, hey, convert more, convert faster, right? Churn less, upsell more, right? That ties directly to value. Now, is that the value they want? Is that what their strategy is? You have to ask them. But like that's right. That's how you become successful at this stuff. And like I'm talking about it maybe from a little vendor perspective, but I'm also like in a leadership team in a large 4,000 person organization now. And so it's those same principles. Like, what do my peers need? What are our pillars? What are the big rocks in the organization that we need to move? How does it fit into the value creation proposals or the strategy from the board?
It's selling regardless of whether you're a vendor or whether you're a internal person trying to get an AI built for your group, or if you're in IT and you're trying to deliver a solution, right? None of this stuff is that easy to deliver and put together. I think that's the point.
I kind of came onto the professionally around the Y2K timeframe, and that was a solution we had to fix or suffer the consequences. Now, the implementation of AI is not necessarily in the same context. It's going to fall into like three categories, which we always sell to, which is, does it generate revenue? Does it save you money? Or is this something that we do from a compliance standpoint? And the kind of going back into that sales process, when we are inquiring in prospects about the why, you should really think about, you should have those answers. And if you don't, you should work with your team to bring them up. Because if you don't have a business case, it's regardless of how much sense it makes to the technologist, how much sense it makes to the academics, the project's not going to get funded. If it gets funded, it's not going to be used longer term. And as you point out, like this is really this is at an atomic level. So as the market's maturing very fast, the overall components, it's still a workflow. And so a model could come in and change, or a transformer could come in and change, or certain pieces. But to get it out the door, it's no different than many of the other technologies that you're working with. And it has to have that, this will have impact. So going back to the use case I mentioned, reducing or improving the number of claims that are processed, that is measurable. And that is why if someone is going to want to implement that. It's very focused. And I think we might move on to our next field note.
I think absolutely. I think that's a good lead in.
Just want to mention the insurance use case. So there was a time when we focused on insurance and we sold some deals. And like the use cases were things like predicting excess subrogations, right? Or the likelihood of claims to go to litigation. These are all like well-suited machine learning problems, right? In the early days. And those directly tied to like goals that this large national insurer had to obviously have less subrogations and not have to go to claims. So again, like I know it's difficult, but like I think like it gets difficult when we overthink it. And if we can bring it down to like the first principles, like you need to make money to keep your business alive and get paid your salary. So how can you contribute to that value, either through generating revenue or reducing costs? And reducing costs in your day-to-day may just be being more efficient. Before we change, just want to leave like, and it's like necessary, the why. I know this gentleman, and he has a consultancy that's popular. He works with a lot of large companies, and he's gone to a few who have like mandates against AI, like they can't use various common tools that you might use all the time for whatever reason. And he went and sort of lectured, and I guess some folks came up to him afterwards and said, poked him in the ribs and said, hey, by the way, we bring our own laptops to work and we use these tools all the time, right? And the company doesn't know it, or would be aggrieved from an HR policy perspective if they found out about it. And then he's looking, I guess the guy was looking at him saying, and I'm going to get a promotion, like I'm getting promoted. So like the why is people who don't use this stuff will be lapped, similar to how generations lap the other in capability by those who do use this stuff. So, all right, thanks for letting me riff on that. Next.
We'll move on to the
topic.
next. Just sum it up. The understanding the why is very similar to every other business process, right? You got to define the requirements, and then that'll allow you to pick the best tool for those requirements. Field note number 2, and we actually had a question come in live about dealing I'll just read the question. I think sets up this field note as well. How do you deal with the buy versus build dilemma? Entry bar is so low that many enterprises think they can build everything on their own. It's not an issue in the POC phase, hence our slide here, our field note. But in production, the more you deal with this, the more you realize production is a completely different beast. So to you guys up there, so the field note 2 is POV or POC, proof of value is easy, production is difficult.
This is actually a lot of what's roiling the AI markets and why there are so many articles about AI being either hard to adopt or a bit overhyped. It's because most of the tools out there demo very well, but when you try to get them into production, you can discover that, well, we're going to need a lot more hardware, or it doesn't work as well, or we're going to have to change models. And actually, just something as simple as we want to try a new model can foil the build part of the plan, right? Because you integrate with OpenAI, and then all of a sudden we want to switch to this model, or this model looks more appropriate. Now we have to re-implement that. That's an example of where tooling and a variety, there are many startups that offer a variety of amazing solutions for different parts of the AI supply chain, if you will. So there are things out there that can save a ton of time. In fact, that's how AI all developed, right? It was a confluence, if you will, and not to mention a product name that's not relevant, the real confluence of things coming together. A lot of it was open source. And a lot of open source pieces were put together, right, and assembled into the stacks that are now creating value for AI. They are the things that you rag against. They are the chatbots. They are the transformers that create these things. They're the fine-tuning approaches. So I think that it's important to keep that in mind, right, that assembling the pieces is how we got here for the most part. So coding everything from scratch is always going to have limits, and it's good for prototypes and POCs. But again, in the same way that buying and implementing a product sometimes can be much more complicated to go to production, can be the same when you try to go from building a simple prototype to building a real production version.
Yeah, I think the quote I always say is done better than not done. And the idea there really comes from that when we do POCs, there's this other thing in the Midwest where we talk about 2-foot-itis, referring to fishermen always need a 2-foot larger boat catch the big fish. And part of maybe the Steve Jobs quote would be better served here is there are really a couple of challenges with the proof of concept that it is a concept and that it doesn't represent the reality. When you take a drug to market, it goes through a lot of clinical trials because of the variances of people. Data is the same way. So you can do a concept, which is really connecting some plumbing together and getting what I call token vomit out. So it's responding, it's giving you things, and our challenge a lot of times is try to explain the difference between token vomit and what is an end solution. As you increase the amount of data in the corpus, talking about, say, Microsoft Copilot, it's just going to give you all the information out of SharePoint. Like, good God, that's like awful, because SharePoint is where all good was, like the modern equivalent of what was the file share. It's where all good content goes to die. It's hard to distinguish between what is important and what's not. So there is this concentric circles that appear when you take it out. So you're challenged with keeping it simple as you go, which is to keep true to sort of an atomic nature of what you're trying to do, and then learn and then iterate. But getting it out the door, this quote we have here from Patton, it's about execution and keeping the experience with it. So as the market's going to change, there's going to be another model. There's going to be another technique. We just released a blog article talking about Copilot and as being the new thing. And it's been out for a few months, building on some things that have been out for a while. But you can't stop and constantly keep things in the lab. That the another MC+A phrase that we like to say is, nothing's foolproof because fools are so ingenious. So as there's no way to predict how your end users are going to use the system other than to put it in front of them and just be prepared to adapt and to iterate so that it goes, and do what you can from the scaling aspect, work with people who've kind of done it as well to give you a different perspective.
I think you kind of want to look at it with a couple different dimensions. One is sort of the culture of the company. Do they build versus buy? There's always a preference. It's just like consultants. Some companies use a ton of consultants and others would never hire a consultant, right? So it's like, do they build versus buy? And another dimension is like, what do they do? Like, what's their business model? What's their value prop? Like, you can't sell coal to Keystone. Ever heard that? I mean, like, ultimately, when you're selling software to software companies, that's a little bit different than selling software to, say, manufacturing companies. And there's going to be a different need for services and support depending on that orientation and which vertical they're in and what their model is. And so I think if you're in a company, you have to assess the capabilities you have. Like, is building AI systems really in your value process, what you should be doing with your resources? Or is it not?
And it's better to be true to yourself, Judith. That my honest take for both buyers and sellers, right? Yeah. If you're a buyer and you do build software, then you should start building. And where you may buy is to look at components, right? That it's not necessarily to build each thing. Like, you don't build a database usually, right? Or a search engine. Those are commodities effectively. So glue, right, could be the focus. I think
that's a really good point. That's often the focus, where there's, especially in AI, where there's just different systems that need to be integrated with.
Right. And if you sell solutions to people who always want to develop, right, it's a different thing. You should focus on enablement, right? I think that's why there are so many products today have open source versions, because the whole point is your developers can enable themselves. Who wants to go arrange for training, right? Or maybe you don't want to hire professional services in advance of getting something working. So I think that's a lot of what the role open source plays in solutions, whether their components are full stack solutions.
And I think these bullet points that came from your notes, Sid, are really, they help the journey, right? So build versus buy is, as Judith said, it's a cultural choice. There we go. I got the thumbs up. Boom. Yeah. But you're also evaluating it from a cost perspective. You have to look at what it costs to run the computing, the customization, and something that's just utterly near and dear to my heart is automated testing and testing and testing. And if you're not testing, you can't scale. You simply cannot.
These are like uneven results.
These are like software development projects to some degree. Even with the no-code abstractions and things like that, right? The concepts, the integration, and like, does the company know how to do software development? Do they know what testing is, right? And that's going to be different. So that's where I think the opportunity is, right? Whether it's a SaaS like Squark that would just plug in, right? Or we always sold services too. I mean, there's always onboarding, if not like gap closing services, right? So
that's exactly. It comes down to automated testing as a cultural thing, I would say. If you automate your testing, then you'll do it a lot, and you'll be able to have real discussions with users. As a solution builder, you won't even have to sit there and say, no, this version's better because the model's better, right? And on our public data test set, if the users can look and say, oh yeah, 5 more questions were answered correctly after we switched models, right? And only 1 question went backwards, which we were able to fix. That's the kind of the automated testing that helps you move projects forward. And also it helps with your costs, right? We actually have to answer a couple thousand questions and we're only testing 50, we might not have confidence about our costs.
Now that being comfortable with failure, I mean, there's being able to A/B test, being able to get to those points. We worked with a client last year, which it took us 6 at least 6 weeks to schedule an A/B test. I mean, that challenge, the complexity to get a A/B test out the door made it just kind of this mountain that you had to climb up to propose an A/B test because they're like, hey, we can only do two this quarter. So I don't want to go back to the QBR and have something that failed. But that failing is okay. You look at most successful entrepreneurs, and they're going to point to the failures that they had being the catalyst to their future success because
Right.
you learn more from that. A winning team doesn't know what necessarily made them win as much as when they lost, making the changes that made them more successful in the future. We're coming up on time, so I think we have to kind of move into the third.
Let's definitely
I gotta
let's
add,
definitely
like,
do
because
that.
that failure is the mother of success is like very true. And I remember when I was teaching this stuff at Babson to the MBAs, I had like a slide that compared traditional IT projects and data science projects. And like IT projects can't fail, right? They just get descoped. Oh, well, we delivered 20% of 100% on time. And okay, well, we're going to do, there's reasons why. And then data science projects, where they just fail. Like data is no good, results are no good, right? Or you get 20% accurate models. And then you have to sort of be like, well, right now you have 0% accurate models because you're guessing. And so is 20% better than no percent, right? Better to be partially right or 100% wrong. So like you get into sort of esoterics with, I think, but failure is 100% valid option. And it's think of it just existentially from machine learning perspective. To do binary, you have 0 and 1. In order to succeed, you have to have failure, right? And so that
My
should be
number one field
expected.
note. Number one field note is you've got to set expectations. It looks like science fiction when you talk to ChatGPT, and it does know an amazing amount about a lot of things. Like it's the end of trivia night, right? For sure. But that doesn't mean it understands your business, your data, or the deeper problems that people get paid to solve at work, right? That's why they're harder problems. And so the AI, it's key saying it's not going to solve every problem, and there are going to be limits to what it can do. But again, look at how quickly things are evolving. So if you build yourself an automated framework, put a little effort into building that, that pays off because as the AIs and technologies continue to evolve, you can just hit that button and retest against your gold set. And that's the trick to sit down. This is the hard part, right? The rubber meets road field note is sit down with the user after having drawn a nice clean box around a group that has a repeatable problem and isn't an enormous number with an enormous number of different problems and figure out, okay, what are the questions that you're trying to answer, the tasks that you're trying to complete, and how do you do that? What data do you use? What queries do you run? If you can then automate the process of running, let's say, searches for those things, collating the data, and seeing, did we get it? Did we find it? Did the AI correctly extract that information, right? If you use RAG, did the RAG produce the right answer? Maybe it just had the right keywords. Maybe you have to do a little bit more. You have to ask an AI to score the results of it. You could say, here's what here's what our editors said, right? Is the right answer to this. Here's what the AI said. What do you think, GPT 4.0? Do you think that it's correct? So you could do a lot of different things, but without a process you can repeat, it's very hard to compare. It's very hard to really declare victory. It's very hard to convince anybody, I think, that what counted could counted. What was counted counted. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we would call it a test harness, right? You got like a bunch of data. Every time we released any incremental or point version of Squark, we had to compare it against the benchmark, right? Which were a whole bunch of data sets that we would run prediction on and look at the AUC and the mean class error and the deviance and things like that, the AIC of the model. And that allowed us to know if like the generalization would degrade. And then like you get into like like when it's in reality. And for example, like any of our company I work for, bought Squark, generates a lot of funds for nonprofits. And so they do campaigns. And a lot of them are direct mail globally. And people send in donations that then get cash caged based on cash, right? Like credit cards, all that jazz. And then for those campaigns, the dollars get counted against controls, right? And what was learned over time is that the gain going through like a predictive system like Squark was so much more efficient and so much more valuable than traditional like RFM or marketing service provider methods with data scientists slaving away for 4 weeks building models and updating them once a
And tool
year,
models.
right? Led to an acquisition. So yeah, you definitely have to build this stuff, and it doesn't mean you can't buy it. And where the pieces of it and where the services come in are to kind of integrate it together. And then it's about proving that value, which can sometimes be done in the short term. Other times it takes a bit longer.
You probably can't build all that. Agreeing with all that, you probably can't build the GPT-4, right? That's beyond most people's capabilities. And so at the end of the day, you're going to
the
assemble
Liquid AI came out today, right?
Yeah,
Liquid AI at your alma mater, MIT.
There's a new one every week. I think that's my point. I wanted to bring this back around though to something that Mike said earlier. I think we can wrap up on this point. Hopefully, we can wrap up on this point. Even when you get the queries working and you think the solution is excellent, always go back to, well, how's this going to feel in production? For example, maybe there's a solution where somebody made a reference earlier to a PDF. You can upload a PDF to a website and answer questions from that PDF. That's great for 5 or 6 different PDFs that you might already have a publishing process for. But if you were to adopt that for 1,000 different websites or web pages with slight variations or significant variations in the PDFs, and now you have to start taking data out of all your existing systems, turning those into PDFs and uploading them, that might look and work well and test well when you're in POV, but when you want to go to a production version, that might be a lot, right? All of a sudden now you need all these humans involved in the publishing process, and you have to manage which PDF is where, and did we update the PDF in this system when we made a change, right? That's the kind of stuff you have to really spend more time on the cost side of it, and that includes modeling, what it looks like when you succeed. So planning for success is also part of getting to a successful production launch.
Yeah, I think to dovetail on that, if you're going to plan for success, you're going to focus on field note number 3. This is like, when we ask our clients to do this, it's like watching a room full of kindergartners who are being held back from the bathroom. They literally get physically uncomfortable. You could tell they don't want to do it. If you look at what is out there on Hugging Face, they're using synthetic queries, and synthetic queries to validate your model is nonsense. I mean, it's a good first pass, but nothing is foolproof because fools are so ingenious that if we have a hallmark, a hall of fame of like stupid queries that people expect certain results from, it would just blow you away. It doesn't match the content. It doesn't match anything mathematical that you could do. But what you need to do is get your business, get your user stakeholders to create a golden set of judgments. What should be the expected outcome? Use that to then pair up with synthetic data or queries or the system to scale. And if you don't do that, then you're gonna suffer that POV to production challenge that you see. Gentlemen, anything else that you want to add here?
Also,
otherwise,
it's how you code too. That can really slow down things. And also the infrastructure and how you're managing quote unquote DevOps, right? How you load balance, how you auto scale the servers, what instances you're running on, if you're say running on AWS and things like that. So there's, there can be some unexpected surprises there. One thing I've learned over the years is these like AI models, super greedy. It's like
ready for a big bill.
Right? Oh yeah, super greedy. They'll use all the RAM, like anything you throw at them, and maybe not in an efficient manner. And you're wondering like, what's going on? And then you dig deep into it, and you find out in the open source community, it's something. It's like, oh, and it's not fixed. So that brings up another reason why you might want to buy, right? Or
at the very least, find a partner who can help you with that stuff. I think that's somebody you trust.
And no one's better than you at computational linguistics and information retrieval and search. That's for sure.
No, LLMs are so much better. That's it.
LLMs.
They can beat me at entity extraction. That's for sure. So that's
I was gonna say as we did collect some questions.
Awesome. Let's do some questions.
And I would just wrap it up as like, so practical AI. I think what's interesting about this discussion, right, is that if you've been involved in software or enterprise solution, there's a roadmap. It's just that there's some scary bits that you need to understand. I say scary as in unknowns, like what's the cost of this? So it's the same thing. Define the requirements, find the user base, and find a way to test it. It's the same thing as if you're lighting up Oracle, right? It's like if you're going to roll out Oracle, it's this kind of same thing. What are you turning on? Which modules? How do we know it's success? Or any other solution? So there's hope.
Yeah, for security, I mean, two things like dynamic application security testing, which are like there's a bunch of pen testing tools out there. I have certain preferences for ones that are located in like North Station, Boston, but sponsor the Bruins. There are a lot of DaaS providers out there. There are also SaaS providers, which may require code escrow and like other people reviewing your source code. But typically, like vendors or great companies will already have that. It could be part of SOC 2, other compliance things. When we didn't have
that's a big issue, you should plan for it, right?
Yeah.
And your build buy factor. So I know a big manufacturer that recently expressed displeasure at how backed up their security team was, right? Onboarding SaaS applications. So if that is not a realistic goal to get something, if that's going to add 2-3 months to a project, right, then plan for an on-prem deployment. There are lots and lots of marketplace tools that can provide that too, right? So you can deploy it on your own hardware and your own cloud sub. So those are the kinds of things that will often really foil a POV to production move too. So I think that's worth it.
Yeah, totally. And you've just got to like with cyber security audits and things like that, whether they've got to get done. And so there's companies that do them for you. You partner with
that's a good way to do it,
right? Or basically they ask the same thing every company over and over again. So if you do them enough, you could probably you can certainly index or learn from all your responses and create the Uber and just pre-send it. So yeah,
there's an AI application.
But security hacks, like in terms of like deliberate prompting to like bust open these things and get them to spit out their system prompts or recipes to create weapons of mass destruction and stuff. I've read about that stuff on like X or some other trade rags, but like, and I've even tried them. You get them out there and you're like, oh, I'll go try this. They never work. And so I think like anything, humans are fallible, flawed. Systems can be too. But like legal documents,
right? There are some real threats, right? Like if you're using an Aura GAI that you have to upload your data to, well, if you're uploading very sensitive data, that could be a problem if they get hacked. It's not so much about security, it's much more about compliance, right? Like if you verified that they follow the same procedures, that's one thing. But those are real considerations. Another thing is it's not so much about hacking. A lot of the services are blocked. Many large enterprise regulated companies in particular don't let people use ChatGPT from work because they're concerned about copying and pasting. So these are all areas where probably if you're trying to build a solution inside the enterprise or sell it to a regulated enterprise, these are things worth considering. They can be literal showstoppers. For example, the zero trust model, which is sort of the baseline in the enterprise, says, so sure, we can stand up a Red Hat Enterprise Linux or whatever. You tell us what kind of server you'd like or cluster. But by default, that thing can't see anything. It can't even access the outside world through the company's proxy if it's in their cloud infrastructure, in their so-called perimeter. I don't know if we're supposed to use the word firewall anymore or not, but so that's a pretty realistic consideration, right? So you're going to have to fill out a form to go and connect that new cluster to the endpoints that you want to talk to. And if you want to move data, then you need storage and you need to have update path. And those things also probably require forms. So that's the reality of security. It's about, depending where you're deploying, right? A consultancy with a G drive is a different thing than a company with 50 applications and hundreds of backend data platforms that they've built products on top of. Those are real different things. And it's just important that you can't just apply AI. It's not going to magically drop in. And that's the reality. So reducing the number of sources that you tackle initially, right, for a pilot, that's a good way to avoid those cross-cutting security concerns.
You're all walk, run.
Here you go. We're all walk, run. That's key stuff. A lot of these
unit tests, atomic.
That's important takeaway.
Surgical. Are they hashtags? Well, I think we're up on time. How about we'll post these questions and answers summarized in a follow-up. If there's any other, trying to see if there's any other last-minute questions that we didn't get to before, but I think we're good.
Yeah, I'm sure people have. I really appreciate everybody taking their time to possibly their lunch break to listen to our conversation. I thought it was a really great discussion. Judith, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's lots of fun to hear you experts ruminate and talk about this new stuff, right, in the earliest days. I mean, though it's been, it's a decade since the GAN, it's just starting. So it's exciting to be at the beginning of this sea change in the way we work with machines.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike and John, for hosting.
Thank you as well. Thank you as well.
Give me the final word.
No. I think everything that's been said is good enough. Thanks again to our audience for giving up their lunchtime to be with us.
Indeed. We'll post this online soon. Please don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn, Twitter, or any of our various websites. We're always here to help and continue the conversation. Thanks again, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.